Well, guys, I have watched the downfall of Joe Rogan for years now. I have to admit, there was a time when I would tap in and watch a couple of his things from time to time. Particularly episodes where he had scientists on, or science popularizers especially, you know? Just talking about science stuff. Joe Rogan's not a higher educated guy. That's part of his appeal, is that he's a very... Besides being wealthy and having a very storied career where he's been famous for a really long time, people perceive him as an everyman. As an impressive guy among everymen, but nonetheless an everyman. The kind of guy who's just like you and achieves success in America. A genuine face of the American dream of modern America. And because of that, Joe Rogan is the most listened to voice on the planet. Period. No single person on this planet is listened to, and his words are taken seriously, than Joe Rogan. Which, years ago, wasn't that frightening of a thought. He was just kind of a dude bro, mostly just there to use the fact that he's a very inquisitive but yet ignorant guy to bring on interesting guests and ask them interesting questions. Because Joe Rogan doesn't know a lot, but he wants to know a lot. And that made him a great interviewer and a really good podcaster. I've gotten shit for saying this in the past, and yet you can give me shit for it, but he's the biggest podcast on the planet for a reason and holds that spot for so many years for a reason. Joe Rogan is very, very successful, and he reaches a lot of people, and it's been worrying that his biggest success, or the thing that brings him so much success, being the fact that he's a relatively ignorant guy, but has a desire to learn, might be what makes him one of the biggest harms to society in the long run. He is willing to bring on anyone that some group of his audience say, "Yo, Joe, you should bring this person on, they say good things." And if that person gets brought on, and they seem smart, and the things that they say seem right, then the vast majority of the time, Joe Rogan is going to just run with it. And many times ends up peddling some dangerous misinfo to a massive, massive audience. And when people call it out, because he's, you know, a massive voice that a lot of people take seriously, the most people take seriously, everyone else starts acting like it's crazy to call out what Joe Rogan is saying, because anyone who takes what Joe Rogan says seriously deserves whatever happens to them, is something you hear a lot from people who watch Joe Rogan and are defending Joe Rogan. And so it polarizes people who wouldn't base their life off of advice from Joe Rogan to follow him and support him more and to defend him, because they see calling out the people who really diehard follow Joe Rogan's life advice as being ridiculous. It's this weird sanity washing where they say, yeah, those people are crazy, and you're crazy for calling them crazy. You should just ignore them. Like, it's sanity washing is the term for this, but it's a weird kind of sanity washing. Regardless, though, for a time it was just this hit or miss thing with Joe Rogan. Sometimes there'd be an ivermectin thing, and sometimes Joe Rogan would genuinely do something awesome. Joe Rogan fact checks Matt Walsh. I love this clip. No, not clips of other people.
I've had this done.
Sometimes you get a hit. Here's an example of a hit, if YouTube does not copyright me for this.
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but it's, if we're talking about the drugs, it's, I mean, millions.
How many people have had this done?
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but it's, if we're talking about the drugs, it's, I mean, millions.
You're talking about hormone blockers?
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers? Really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess.
This is the moments when I like Joe Rogan, is when he goes from inquisitive and just taking everything up to skeptical. When a guest says something really confidently, and then he responds with skepticism. even if he ends up falling for it in the end, the fact that he doesn't immediately fall for it here, I like that about Joe Rogan. I want more moments like that from Joe Rogan. Those are the moments where I actually am like, okay, Joe, is when he goes, really? Like, millions of people, really? Like, tries to nail them out and get them to say a definitive statement that they can't walk back. I like that.
Yes, is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess. I can say for double mastectomies, I read a report recently that there were over 1,000 done between 2016 and 2019, and when you compare that to how many were done between 2008 and 2015, it's a massive increase. And over 1,000 girls had gender affirming double mastectomies in that time frame.
And when you say girls, you're talking about prepubescent,
right? Minors, and that's just up until 2019, and then we know that there's been this exponential increase with all this stuff year over year. So it's a lot. It's too many. Having this happen to one kid is way too many. It's a lot more than one.
He's already doing
look,
the cope.
If you're an adult and you want to do that,
because he knows it's not millions, so he's already doing the cope.
And you understand who.
He's like, well, even if it was only thousands, it's too many. Then why even make it an argument about how many people it's happening to? Why not just make the argument about how it's immoral? Why can't we have that argument? Because that's never the discussion. They never explain. They don't even bother anymore explaining how it's immoral. They always failed at that argument. So now they just coast on the presumption that they are right on the grounds that being trans is bad. And now it's a conversation about how many people are trans, how much transness is spreading, with a pre-assumption that it's bad. Because if no one's having the argument about whether or not it's bad, we're just having the argument about scale, then we've already lost the argument about whether or not it's bad. If we're debating them on the scale of the issue, we've already ceded the ground that there's an issue. That's why they've started doing this, by the way. For any curious.
Who you are and what you are, and this is how you feel you should progress. You're an adult. This is a free country. You should be able to do whatever you want. But when you're talking about doing that to children, the fact that so many people are on board and so many people are angry, if you have, people are going to be angry at us that we're having these conversations.
Yeah, they will be. And I also...
Well, there's a peek at the part of Joe Rogan that's leading him to the bad now. And we're going to get to that in a minute.
I actually think that this shouldn't be happening to...
It's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
Not quite millions.
Kind of undercounted, but
that would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, hundreds of thousands at this, but I could be wrong.
Anyway, you get some hits with Joe Rogan. He sometimes hits, but way more often he misses. And man, the misses are getting bad. Recently, okay, actually first, left and right, I have been kind of dialing up my rhetoric against anti-war talking points. Now, that may sound crazy. Anti-war? Zan, what are you, pro-war? No, I'm not really pro-war. I wouldn't say that. But I've noticed that consistently, those that brand themselves as anti-war tend to be Tulsi Gabbard types. The kinds of people who aren't exactly anti-war, they're anti-America getting involved in the world's conflicts. Regardless of whether or not we're backing the right side, or if backing the right side is actually objectively best for America and its people. Not just tankies, but just these isolationist, protectionist types. It's gotten to be very popular policy on the right and left, and Joe Rogan has fallen for this shit hook, line, and sinker, to the extent that it is broiled over into outright rage and hatred for the Ukrainian people. Because we're backing Ukraine, the narrative in the perception in these Americans' minds, left and right, is that Ukraine are the aggressors because they're backed by America. And the idea that Putin has some kind of reasonable demands he wants to take to the table and just wants to negotiate with Zelenskyy and the Ukrainians and come to a peaceable, reasonable agreement and have a negotiation so people can stop dying. That is not Putin's goal. Putin's goal is domination and to take over land and to annex. And the people don't want it, so the people are fighting. And the president is doing the people's will and continuing to run the country and coordinate the fighting and coordinate with America. And in response, this is what Joe Rogan had to say, but this is actually coverage of what Joe Rogan had to say by a channel called Kiev Independent. The video is called Ukrainians React to Joe Rogan's Rant on Ukraine. The responses from Ukrainians are in Ukrainian, so I'll have to read them out more likely than not. But what Joe Rogan says here, I have a lot to say about. And I need to be clear, this is the worst of what the anti-war side of politics can bring you to.
Weirdness of people.
In the recent podcast, Joe Rogan, a famous American podcaster, insulted Zelenskyy and Ukrainians, criticizing the Biden decision of Atakam's supply to Ukraine. Today, Kiev Independent is going to ask Ukrainians to find out their reactions regarding Joe Rogan's comments about Ukraine.
What I don't feel safer is right now they're launching missiles. How are you allowed to do that when you're on the way out? Like, the people don't want you to be there anymore. This should be like some sort of a pause for like significant actions that could potentially start World War III.
I like how in Joe Rogan's mind, the democratic choice of 2020 stops mattering because of the democratic choice of 2024. Biden's term isn't over yet. The people voted for Biden from this time period to this time period. Like, what are you talking about, dude? This is he's literally mad about democracy here. Simple as.
Чесно, приїзди, да, поживи тут, ну, типу, зрозумій насправді.
Based. Honestly, go fuck yourself is what he said. Come live here, and you'll truly understand what it's like. I'm translating for the people that don't have their eyes in the screen, because few lurkers are working right now. Yeah. To be clear, by the way, the Ukrainians do not hold back on Joe here. And many of them clearly didn't know what Joe's opinion was, and they seem like... It's actually kind of heartbreaking to see their reaction, because they seem like... you can see it that it feels like Americans are abandoning them. You can see the feeling in their face, and it's so heartbreaking. I'm not joking. You'll see what I'm talking about later.
Справді, що відбувається, ну, типу, своїми якимись там заголовками. Можливо, ти на когось і працюєш, тому такі блогери, як ти, мабуть, купляються.
Де він там живе? Звідки? Ну, то нехай він приїде в Київ, нехай приїде в Україну, подивиться все своїми власними очима, а тоді робить якісь
They won't come to Kyiv or Ukraine for the same reason I won't go to Kyiv or Ukraine. Unless I have a terminal diagnosis of some kind and I'm trying to go out, like, you know, just making the most name for myself as I can. Which is because Russians might bomb them. Like, Russia is the aggressor. I think they kinda internally know that, and they would never go to Ukraine because they know that they would be in the line of Russia's fire. But they're willing to safely and cushily from their podcast rooms in America claim that Ukraine is the bad guys, they're the aggressor, and they're gonna get us into World War III.
висновки, тому що...
Mind you, Russia has been bombing them constantly. Now, Ukraine bombs Russia a little bit. And no, you're gonna start World War III. Okay, fuck off.
За стільки тисяч кілометрів то важко оцінити ситуацію. Я думаю, що він просто не відчуває і не розуміє, що відбувається в світі.
Цей подкастер, він переносить відповідальність з...
Yep. I would say that Joe Rogan puts the responsibility of the Russians on us. And the reason why is solely because America is on the side of Ukraine. The perception is that Russia is Russia, and they're doing what they want to do of their own volition, and that has no bearing on America. And that we need to just leave the situation alone and let it unfold as it would, and that Ukraine are the bad guys and going to get us into World War III because we're backing Ukraine. We are lending them additional strength to defend themselves. And so, whoever America is backing is at fault. The anti-war people in America at the end of the day are just anti-American military-industrial complex. That's it.
Росіян на нас. Ну, насправді все не так. Насправді не ми почали війну, і відповідальність абсолютно на них лежить за можливий початок Третьої світової і так далі. That's all.
Zelensky says Putin is terrified. F*** you, man. F*** you people. You f***ing people are about to start World War III.
Якби я прокоментувала
Like, you can hear how genuinely upset Joe Rogan is at Zelenskyy for feeling like they have potentially an upper hand now in the fight to defend their country from Putin. It's like, fuck you, Zelenskyy. It's like someone being attacked in the woods by a bear and then finally reaching their rifle and shooting the bear, and someone who's been watching and refusing to help the whole time saying, "Oh, fuck you, dude! You're making this place even more." Like he's like trying to read a book, and he's like, "Now you're firing guns, really? Like, I'm just trying to chill here and read my book, and you're here getting mauled by a bear for the last hour, and you finally reach your gun, and you're gonna fire your gun now, make it harder for me to read my book, really? You can't just let me chill out?" And like blaming the guy getting attacked by the bear, that he finally reached his gun and shot the bear because the dude just wants to read and not help him. That is like a simplified version of the interaction that is going down here, legitimately. Also, I liked how I used Russia, like the bear is Russia in this analogy. That's pretty fitting. Although I guess Ukraine would probably be like a slightly smaller bear or something. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Ukraine has bears too.
цю ситуацію, ну, напевно, теж f***ю. Що ще можна сказати? Ну, це образливо.
Не ми розпочали цю війну, і, ну, взагалі, це більша
Oh yeah, Russia is the bear and Ukraine is Leonardo DiCaprio. Leo wins that fight in the end.
відповідальність лежить саме на Росії, на Путіна за те, що він розпочинає Третю світову війну.
Дивно, що американці, я вважала, що вони є вічливі, такі виховані люди, тому що це просто образливо, то, що він каже по відношенню до нас.
It's not like nobody knows we've been funding this. It's a proxy war. The whole thing is f***ing insane. It's insane. Come to the negotiation table. Sit down. Work this out. Stop killing everybody.
This is what this, like, simple-minded, your only concern should be reducing the amount of conflict and death mindset that you can, the idea that you can really just simplify these conflicts down to that level on any issue is how you get a take this dumb. There are very few, I should say, conflicts in the world that are simple enough that you can just narrow it down to this, right? It's just, this is a very single-minded mindset, and I don't think it's the case for Joe Rogan, but I think it's the case for a lot of political pundits that repeat basically the same takes as Joe Rogan, such as Hassan. I think they're lazy. I think they don't want to research these conflicts and come to a well-informed conclusion, but they still need to make money and are expected to talk about these topics, and so they do so in a uneducated way, and they are constantly, desperately trying to protect themselves from being called out for their ignorance, because they want to be seen as super smart and knowing everything, not as just like a person. I think a lot of people like Hassan and a lot of like progressive and right-wing figures oversimplify these issues because they cannot talk about them in a more complex way. But the sad part is they start teaching a simplified version of things to their followers. It's why Hassan is so awful when it comes to geopolitics. Yeah, he has the same mindset as Joe Rogan. Literally 1-to-1. And the same opinion on the entire conflict.
Якби Штати так само виконували всі домовленості з приводу безпек країн і їх державності, то цього б не було.
So what he's saying here is actually totally true. Very early on, and I mean early on in this war, Ukraine had every opportunity to eviscerate Russia's navy, their entire fleet. They were in the bay of whatever the fuck, like or the sea that's like perfect like missile striking range from Ukraine. They could have wiped out like from long distance the entire Russian fleet. And the reason why Russia moved their fleet in was because they knew that the US had to give approval before Ukraine could launch an attack. And the US didn't, because there wasn't a lot of popularity for escalating conflict, obviously. It wasn't until recently that Ukraine got the go-ahead, and that's what Joe Rogan is complaining about in that clip. But way earlier in the war, Ukraine could have wiped out Russia's navy, crippled their military push, and really given Ukraine some chips to bring to the bargaining table. You can't sit down and start negotiating if the guy who is just there to take and take and take can't, like, there's no leverage. You have no leverage on him. He can just say no and continue taking and taking and taking. And that's what he'll do. And so this is like Joe is basically shaming the dude who's getting robbed for not handing his money over. You know, like I don't know what else to say, what else to call it.
Зараз сідати нас за перемовини. Ми домовлялися вже давно, мабуть, з самого початку, коли стала незалежна Україна, коли ми відмовились від...
That's, I know, and I'm only talking about how this affects Ukraine, but we could also talk about NATO as a whole. Like, NATO doesn't want Ukraine falling to Russia. Like, mind you, like, NATO never agreed not to allow any, like, new countries to join. Like, they don't want Russia getting any closer. It's most of Europe is not in favor of the U.S. pulling their support for Ukraine. We wouldn't just be abandoning the Ukrainians, we'd be abandoning Europe as a whole to Russia.
Ядерної зброї, коли ми порізали всі свої заводи, літаки віддали і так далі, це теж були домовленості, але чомусь вони не спрацювали. Тому зараз які домовленості можуть спрацювати? Ну, допоможіть тоді зброєю, типу, яка проксі-війна? Зараз все проксі-війна, вона все зараз відбувається в інтернеті, маніпуляція в головах, так само і вони зараз сидять і маніпулюють думками людей.
Якби на нього нападали десь там в Америці, на бензозаправці, наприклад, приставляли йому ніж до горла, то як би він...
Exactly. She made the same analogy that I did. If Joe Rogan was at a gas station in America and someone put a knife to his throat, how would he negotiate? She cooked.
Би зміг перемовити. Ну, якщо він знає якісь формули, якісь сценарії, як можна домовлятися в таких обставинах, коли в тебе стоїть ніж на сонної артерії, то не просто, ну так, я вважаю, важко говорити, коли тебе вбивають.
Скажіть матерям, дітям, дружинам закатованих людей про переговори, про те, що можна якось домовитися, коли не можна повернути дітей закатованих.
Also, Zelenskyy, can I get a drug test? Can we just get one drug test before we send you any more money? Like, what are you doing?
On so many levels, on so many levels, I need to respond to that. For one, Zelensky's on drugs, I guess? Maybe. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he's on some uppers. I'd be on uppers, bro. Like, if I was Zelenskyy, I'd be like, all right, I need all of the country's coke and meth, because I'm not sleeping until this war is over. Like, how do you expect me to sleep, dude? Like, I gotta lock in, and I need to be like the Russian sleep experiment guys for the next 4 years, just battle planning in this room. So maybe he might be on drugs in all seriousness, but I want to point out that this is Joe Rogan saying this. Joe Rogan. Like, I know what DMT is and eventually tried it because I learned of it because of Joe Rogan. He popularized that shit. Like, Joe Rogan's the psychedelic drug guy. He smokes weed with Elon Musk on his podcast. He is the guy who's the cool dude who does drugs on his podcast. He is that guy. How can he be all like, this guy needs to take a drug test. Drugs are bad, okay? When he's the guy who smokes weed with Elon. Also hilarious that Elon smoked weed on the Joe Rogan podcast, but you know he'll be making, and Trump will be making, no moves to legalize marijuana in their administration. It's like, oh my God, dude. Like how can he be saying this?
Коли не можна повернути дітей закатованих.
Also, Zelenskyy, can I get a drug test? Can we just get one drug test before we send you any more money? Like, what are you doing? This is like cocaine, like, baby. Putin's scared, man.
Yeah.
Putin's terrified.
Jacked
We
up.
got him. We got him, man. We got him.
Like, what are you talking about? He has nuclear missiles, you monkeys.
Joe Rogan, referring to the Ukrainian people, says, "What are you talking about? He has nuclear missiles, you fucking monkeys." He just hates the Ukrainian people. He has been so anti-war, like any conflict is going to be the next World War III brained, that any group willing to fight to protect their country from invasion with the backing of the US deserves his ire. The people deserve his ire. This isn't just him getting called out for spreading some like medical misinfo on his podcast anymore. It's him outright condemning basically all of Europe to the conquering of a maniac. Future generations are going to look back at Putin's push to conquer Europe, and they're going to talk about the figures all throughout the West that enabled the 21st century's Hitler to do what he tried to do, and they're going to point to Rogan as the largest voice in the world at the time, and he backed the Russian cause to conquer Europe and eventually the world. Because we're going to, obviously Putin's going to fail. He's a maniacal dictator. He will fail, as they all do. And then, in the future, we'll look back and we'll think about how people could have ever fallen for that guy's grift. How could they have backed a dude who was, in the view of the world, trying to conquer other countries? How could they back him and then frame those that he's invading as the aggressors? It happened in World War II. It did. And it's going to happen again here.
Jesus Christ.
Я думаю, що Зеленський же не один, за ним стоїть команда, тому...
I love this too. Every time people are like in America call Zelenskyy a warmonger, I love how much the people of Ukraine come out to say, no, we're fighting. We are with him. We are behind him. He has us. Like they aren't taking it. Like an insult to Zelenskyy to a Ukrainian is an insult to all of them. And that's the kind of national like cohesion that only a foreign country invading you can really bring about, Like, I bet so many of the general barriers and disagreements in Ukraine have melted away in the last years. And, like, there's a very strong sense of brotherhood I'd be willing to bet among the Ukrainian people now. Because at this point, it's like, it's us against Russia and apparently the world if the U.S. is willing to drop support due to popular opinion from Ukraine. It's a really fucked situation.
Він представляє команду, країну, тому нас всіх мають перевірити на наркотики. Ну, в мене немає наркотиків особисто.
I don't have any drugs
Ця людина, яка
personally.
це говорить, вона не була у стані війни 3 роки, як наш пан президент. І
She's just straight up, this man has never seen war. That is very funny, too, because Joe Rogan's buddies are all ex-Navy SEALs and, like, ex-military dudes. Like, retired military dudes. That's, like, all of his buddies and all of his security guards and all of his, like, his little clique. And yet he's this, like, virtue-signaling anti-war dude, too. He's never seen a day of combat in his life. And yet he's out here calling Zelenskyy a crazy drug addict. It's like, okay, man. Your job is you podcast, dude. You're like me. We talk on the internet. We aren't badass like Zelenskyy is. Zelensky's a badass. We're not. We talk on the internet for a living, bro. Like, I don't care if you did commentary for UFC. When your job is to talk into a mic, you're not badass. That's just not how it works.
те, наскільки він вже втомлений, наскільки в нього вже немає сил, то можна подумати будь-що. Ну, він може з їх слів употребляти будь-що, ну тобто будь-який наркотик, який вони там собі уявили.
Ну, мені, по-перше, не сподобалась маніпуляція в цьому відео, що я скину тобі гроші, якщо ти скинеш мені тест на наркотики, чи якось так. Для мене це дуже дивна фраза, дуже дивний вираз, який звучить в сторону глави нашої держави. Вот. В цілому, я не думаю, що президент України взагалі таким займається, мені так не здається. Вот. В цілому, слова цього персонажа дуже дивні, дуже якісь некоректні, я б так сказала, тому питання до нього, чи він нічого не вживає перед тим, як це казати. От, все.
So yeah, Joe Rogan has taken the anti-war pill and swallowed it so deeply that he is now pro-Russia. Many such cases. Really, many such cases. This is why we're turning up the heat. We're turning the dial up in terms of the heat on the anti-war side of the left and the right, because the anti-war rhetoric is never actually anti-war rhetoric. Like, it's never like, oh, Russia is invading. I'm against this. I'm against war. We should fight to ensure the peace that can be preserved if Russia does not continue to conquer Europe, because that is not peace. And yet, instead, they're just arguing for us not to fight against an aggressor. That's not anti-war. That's not peace. That's submitting to tyranny. And there is no peace under tyranny. There never has been, and there never will be. That's not how it works. You have to fight fascism to ensure peace. Like, there's always a paradox to these things. Every issue, at a certain point, gets paradoxical. The paradox of tolerance, the paradox of peace, every time, right? Paradox of law or lawlessness, right? Let's say you want to make a Minecraft server, right? And it's going to be an anarchy server. There are no rules, there are no laws or anything. What if all the players get together and decide to instill mob justice and mob rule? They basically turned a place that was meant to be anarchy into a place with rules and law, because enough people gathered together and created that. If you do not then overreach and disallow the formation of mob rule and allow anarchy to go back into effect and dismantle whatever in-game government has been made, then it's not really anarchy anymore, right? And so you've paradoxically ended up at what you didn't want to be by enforcing what you wanted so heavily. The paradox of tolerance. If you tolerate intolerance too much, the intolerant can gain power, right? They can gain power, and then they can destroy tolerance as a concept. This is sort of an extension of the discussion of freedom of speech. Like, free speech absolutism can lead to those that are opposed to freedom of speech using it to gain power and destroy it as a concept. All of these things, taken to their extremes, can become paradoxical. And I notice that is exactly what is happening with the issue of anti-war with a lot of people, and Joe Rogan is a perfect example of that. He has gone so anti-war that he paradoxically supports the aggressor in a conflict. This is why my eyes glaze over when anyone who's ANCAP starts speaking. Smart. You shouldn't listen to what anyone who's ANCAP has to say. They have nothing of value to tell you. You should engage with them, but it's fine if your eyes glaze over. I promise you're not missing anything. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this segment, if you found it enjoyable, educational, or even entertaining, then please consider leaving a like, whether you're watching live right now or after the fact when this goes up on YouTube as its own video. Leave a comment if you can, as likes and comments are the best way to boost my content in the algorithm, and it's totally free. Subscribe and ring the bell icon if you haven't already, so that YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload a new video, because believe me, if you don't, they won't. And if you want to see more from me on other platforms, be sure to follow my social medias linked down below in the description, including my Blue Sky, where I've gotten a lot more active lately, and I'm trying to post more, and my Discord server, where at least once a week on Fridays I host gaming events, call-in streams, watch parties, and I also announce all my new uploads and streams there. So if you want to be a part of the community and you don't want to miss anything, you definitely want to join that, so make sure you hop on in. Link in the description. Finally, if you want to support me directly, Thank you so much. I do appreciate it, by the way. Consider donating, subscribing, gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or supporting me financially through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, StreamElements, Patreon, or buying my merch through the Streamlabs link down below in the description. Regardless, though, as I said before, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again next time.